part of the pleasure of free soloing, of difficult free soloing, is to take something that should be really scary and that basically is really scary, and then to make it feel comfortable through enough practice or training or whatever. Because then you get to be in some of the most incredible places on earth, that should be so scary and feel totally comfortable. And I mean, I suppose in climbing, that is kind of the feeling of mastery, to be in a position that you're like, this should be really scary, but instead I feel great.
This episode is supported by Huel.
Well, Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Could we start by just talking about the thing that you're most famous for, which is your free solo work?
Mm.
So, like a lot of people, I've watched that documentary 3 times. The first time through my hands, not daring to actually look at what I'm watching. I'm wondering what's going on. The second time to actually enjoy it, and then the third time to share it with other people to say, you're not quite going to believe what is happening here. What do you think when you sit and watch it with other people is the most common thing that they ask?
Are you afraid? Do you think you're going to die? Things like that.
And what's the answer?
Yeah, obviously I'm afraid sometimes, but then you build up to it, you train, you practice, you do whatever. I mean, the ideal is to have a good experience and not be afraid. So, I mean, I think part of the pleasure of free soloing, of difficult free soloing, is to take something that should be really scary and that basically is really scary, and then to make it feel comfortable through enough practice or training or whatever. Like basically go through the whole process until it feels. Because then you get to be in some of the most incredible places on earth, that should be so scary and feel totally comfortable. And I mean, I suppose in climbing, that is kind of the feeling of mastery, to be in a position that you're like, this should be really scary, but instead I feel great.
So, you used that really interesting term there, mastery, Alex. What do you see mastery as for people listening to this? What does that mean for you?
Well, I think doing something really well. I mean, it just depends what you're doing, but to truly feel comfortable doing something at a very high level. I don't know, like perfectly executing something.
And when did you first in your life have this desire for mastery?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think that even the term mastery has come to me later, having done so many interviews about free soloing and about this type of stuff and trying to search for what the appropriate words are for the feeling and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I mean, I would say that this is all post hoc, like sort of afterward I've come up with the terms to describe the sensation that you're sort of seeking.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I think,
so let's go back to before you'd realized it was mastery and it was just a feeling or a sensation.
Well, the feeling is just the feeling is feeling like the man, because you're like, I'm doing something challenging and I'm doing it really well. Sometimes you just know that you're doing something and it can't be done better than you're doing it right in that moment. And I think that's true for any discipline in life. Like sometimes I'm not really skilled enough at anything else to experience that. but I presume that somebody in the kitchen, could be like chopping, just like doing it, like going so well, and be like, nobody else could be doing this better in this moment.
So it sounds in many ways, and again, when you do that post-rationalization, that you're describing what Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist, described as a sense of flow.
Yeah. But that's another thing that after reading all the books, and I was like, oh, this is what you're trying
flow.
to seek. Yeah.
But I'm interested because Stephen Kotler, the author, talks about how when you hit a state of flow, we tend to be 10 times more productive, or snipers tend to be 230 times faster at learning. I'm interested in the conditions that you've learned when you look back on this mastery that you've achieved, on how you achieved the conditions for flow.
Well, first off, I wouldn't say that I've achieved any kind of mastery. I think it's more like an ephemeral state that you occasionally experience, which is sort of the definition of flow. And I mean, I'm actually pretty skeptical of all the sort of like life hacky book things where it's like tap into flow and type 20 times faster and get your emails done. Because at least in my experience, I've only really experienced, I don't know if you want to call it flow, but basically flow in very specific times, brought on in very specific ways. Basically, because even free soloing, a lot of the time you're not feeling flow per se. You're just climbing and it's comfortable and it's fun and it's nice. And then every once in a while you sort of flip the switch and you're sort of an autopilot and you're just really performing. And I've really only experienced that on the hardest things. I guess because it requires a certain level of difficulty to sort of force you into that mindset.
Would you take us to a moment then when you experienced flow and tell us the story of it?
I mean, this is I feel like this is the sort of podcast where we're going deeper. So, I'll try to actually break it down. So with, just with free soloing El Cap, let's say, starting off the ground, definitely not in flow. Like jittery, sort of nervous, it's slightly cold, you're still warming up. And now, do you guys know anything about climbing? Do you guys know
Minimal.
like grades and so like difficulty grades and things? So the first pitch, the first section of climbing, the first 50 meters of the route is relatively easy. In American grades like 10C, which for me is something that I can easily overpower. Like I can make it feel safe, so I don't have to trust my feet really. It's the kind of thing where like if my foot slipped, I could probably hold on, just be like, ugh, and like it'd be fine.
Right.
And so, but then the second pitch, which is now, 60 meters off the ground, high enough that if you fell off, you'd probably die. The difficulty goes up a little bit, and there are a few moves where there are basically no handholds. You have to trust your feet. And this isn't the part you see in the film that they sort of hype up as the free blast slabs, which is similar style. But nobody was filming this first little section 60 meters off the ground because it's like a ho-hum little thing. But so you have to pitter-patter across this little thing with your feet, holding nothing for your hands. And to me, that's where I sort of switch into like, this is now, I can't overpower it. Like I have to just perform. And so for me with free soloing, there's like a flip that switches when I have to be fully committed to it. It's like now if, I just have to trust my feet and my feet slip, I'm going to die. And that's it. Now it's like, it's on. Because at an easier level than that, then you can just kind of overpower it. You can like stay out of full commitment. You can kind of keep half-assing it. You're like, I'm climbing, but I'm climbing with a little bit more muscle than required because, I want to feel safe. It's like surrendering to the experience in a way.
Right.
Like up to a point, you can just overpower it. And then at a certain point, you just have to surrender to, I'm doing this thing and see what happens.
So what are you trusting?
Not that you're rolling the dice or anything. But
no, but you're trusting things go okay, aren't you? They kind of, there has to be a moment where you don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, you're trusting your preparation, you're trusting your footwork, your self-belief. You're like, I know I can do this, and now I just need to actually do it.
And in what part of the explanation you've just given us, which was fantastic, where's the flow moment?
The flow moment is after you surrender to the experience. Now you're flowing, basically.
And so are you then still consciously making decisions or are things just kind of almost happening?
I mean, ideally, things are mostly just happening.
Yeah.
Though sometimes you still have to make decisions. And with something like El Cap, is almost a 4-hour climb. So you kind of go in and out of moments. Because, what I just described, I'm like, okay, now I'm in flow. And I was like cruising for a while. But then there are easier sections where it's pretty chill again. And you kind of go out of that mode a little bit. And then, I stop in places and pop my shoes off. I like pee off ledges and stuff. So, I mean, it's not like you're just in it the whole time. And you wouldn't want to be because you can't really maintain that kind of focus for 4 hours.
Did you know that less than half of Brits eat breakfast every day of the week? I mean, that's amazing. But why? Well, it's because we're all time poor, especially in the mornings. So we compromise. My fix is Huel's nutritionally complete high-protein shake, a complete meal in a bottle that slots perfectly into my life. Head to the link in the description for a free t-shirt on your first order with Huel. How can you resist that?
But there is often a moment doing what you do where I imagine fear comes in.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd love to
always.
Yeah, I'd love to know if you could tell us a time when that happened, but also really interestingly, what mental acrobatics you play to
so continuing the specific El Cap free solo example because it's just easy. So the first 300-ish meters are mostly low angle, so you're kind of on your feet. So your arms aren't getting that tired yet, even though you're rock climbing this vertical wall, but it's just not really vertical. Like you're mostly stair stepping, basically. Very technical stair stepper. But then after the first 300 meters or so, you get to the first section that's actually pretty steep and it's really on your arms. And I remember doing that section, my arms started to get pumped, which is totally normal for warming up. It'd be like if you went to the sport crag with your friends and you had a rope and it was all like you try to get pumped in the morning to warm up. But I remember being like, oh my God, I'm getting kind of pumped. I was like, is this bad? And sort of having like that moment of fear. And this is why I'm saying that you can kind of come in and out of the flow state a little bit. Because no matter how much you're like, I'm flowing, I'm doing it, then you experience new sensations in your body where you're like, oh, am I supposed to be feeling this pumped? Like, is this too
And
early
why would
to
that
feel
be bad?
pumped? Well, if you get too pumped, then eventually you get too fatigued. It's like muscular fatigue. Your arms open and you fall off. But, and it's not uncommon in free soloing to get pumped more quickly than you would with a rope because you hold on tighter because you're scared, basically. Which is sort of understandable that when you're climbing without a rope, you often do hold on a little bit more tightly to certain things. or in this particular case, in this section of the wall that I'm describing, you're doing a thing called lie backing. So it's like your counter pressure between your feet and your hands. You're like this. And so when you have a rope on, you often have your foot lower and you're more balanced and you're more relaxed. But when you don't have a rope, you often hold a little tighter because you feel more secure when it's close. If you imagine like climbing a coconut tree or something, like hand over handing up a thing and you're counter pressuring with your foot.
Yeah.
If your foot's really low, it's more relaxing. It's easier for your body, but it's also more prone to skating out below you, like slipping, and then you fall and die. Anyway, all that to say, when you're lie backing and soloing, you often hold on a lot tighter and then you get pumped a lot faster and then you're sort of like, and so then it's easy to get into your head a little bit. We're like, am I going to pump too fast? And, am I going to get tired? Am I going to fall?
So just to finish that, how do you put away the fear then? What do you say to yourself when the fear begins to rise? And everyone watching or listening to this will have experienced that moment for various reasons where it kind of comes ground up, doesn't it? And you're like, oh my goodness, what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's hard. I think that's a big part of what you learn as a climber is how to differentiate those types of sort of well-founded fears and sort of the general anxiety, like unfounded fears, and when to ignore them and when not to. In this particular case, what I was describing, I think I just kind of reminded myself, this is warming up. Like, you're supposed to be getting pumped. And I'd trained so much, I'd practiced so much. I was like, I knew that I could handle a high level of pump. It's just kind of like, oh, this is warming up, relax, and I just kept climbing. And sure enough, over the next 200 or 300 meters worth of climbing, it's kind of like moderate through the middle of the wall. I just settled in and it was all fine.
Amazing.
So tell us about that inner voice, because it sounds to me that moment of surrender, there seems to be a stillness that you talk about where you just let go to the moment.
Ideally, it's like an autopilot where your body just does what it's supposed to do and you don't think about it anymore, I guess.
But I'm interested in the bit where that internal chatter is very obvious. So when I'm getting pumped and I've got to remind yourself, what are the techniques that you've learned in terms of to work with that inner voice rather than let that inner voice work against you and convince you that what you're doing is literally terrifying?
Yeah, I don't know if I've really, the obvious things, take a deep breath, compose yourself. Sometimes that means literally relaxing your grip a little bit. As a climber, you often overgrip and your vision kind of narrows and you'll just be like tunnel vision. Like, it's really common in climbing. Like, when people are climbing with ropes, they'll get really scared. They'll hold on super tightly. And then they'll finally get in a piece of gear or like clip the rope to something and suddenly feel safe. And then notice that there's a giant foothold below them. They can step down and be like, oh, relax, things like that. It's like often your whole world contracts too much because you're like so tense. And then as soon as you feel safe again, you're like, oh, there's a huge thing I can just stand on. This is totally chill. And then you relax again. You're like, why was I so scared? And that's a pretty common experience in climbing. Like, just at a normal, safe day at the sport crag, you feel that all the time.
Yeah.
And so you sort of train yourself that even in moments of stress to relax a little bit, take the deep breath, compose, look around, and then process, And
how important... sorry.
Well, but none of it's that clear cut. It's like you're up there just doing your best. You're never like, here's my checklist to like manage fear. You're up there just being like, like this is a lot,
Yeah, of course.
I think that's really interesting you say that, actually, because I think when people watch free solo, they go, well, this guy's different to us. He's just able to do this thing. And I think for you to be really honest about the fact that there are moments of fear, you're ticking things off. You're doing what everyone else does in normal everyday life to stay calm.
I think the difference though is that I've had to do it freaking 5 days a week for 20 years, because like it's climbing, in climbing, you get scared all the time. And especially in free soloing, like it is just fundamentally scary. Even climbing with the rope, you get scared all the time just because you're looking at big falls and it's scary. And so, I think that if I know anything about fear, it's from having experienced a ton.
Would you take us to the most scared you've ever been on the face?
Oh, I don't even know. I've so many random stories of like, and then I thought I was going to die. Like, the punchline is always, and then I don't know. Okay, like I'll give you the very condensed version of this one experience in Zion National Park, which is a couple hours away from here. In a fit of sort of young 20s angst, I on-site sold this route, which means climbing it without a rope your first time with no preparation, like no practice. So all I had seen is like a topo. So I'd seen a map, like here's the route. I drove into the park. It was winter. I was going through some things with an ex-girlfriend and whatever. It is classic, kind of harnessing a lot of emotional angst to do something that I'd wanted to do it for a long time and it was within my abilities. But, anyway, the weather forecast showed that it was supposed to start snowing at noon. But I was kind of like, soloing doesn't take that long. So I was like, oh, it should be fine. And then it's like a 800-foot route or 1,000-foot route. And normally you would rappel it with 2 ropes, but I wasn't going to carry 2 ropes because I was climbing by myself. So I was like, oh, I'll hit the top and then I'll scramble up to the rim of the canyon, which is a couple thousand feet higher, and then pick up this hiking trail, which I thought I'd be able to find. Long story short, I sold the route. Pretty scary. It's kind of hard. It's called Schoensbutters for anybody that climbs. And it started snowing on the last pitch. So as I was finishing, I was like, it's starting to snow. And I was like, okay, this is getting kind of full on. But thankfully finished the climb, made it to the top of the route. And then it turns out that the 2,000 feet from the top of the route to the rim was extremely steep, extremely technical, like mountainside that was all covered in consolidated hail, basically. It was like not quite snow, but it was like ball-bearing hail, kind of like desert snow. I was like, oh no. And so then I began this kind of intense survival experience trying to quest up this mountainside, which entailed all kinds of harrowing things. But basically, it was a building fear the whole time because like as I'm soloing and I see the weather building, then you start to feel flurries of snow. You start to feel a little panic. You're like, okay, I hope nothing gets wet.
So how did you get up there? Because that sounds nigh on impossible.
Yeah, it was kind of... Are we allowed to curse?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of fucked up. Yeah. It's really scary. And then actually that same, it's funny because I want to call it a descent because it's getting off the top of the climb. But in this case, it's 2,000 more feet of ascent. But I was following this kind of giant geologic scale, like ledge system, like a ramp that was kind of trending this way. And it was capped by this big head wall, which basically like the head wall was too big at one point. And so I kept kind of trending because the head wall was getting smaller as I got higher, but the ramp I was on kept getting narrower and narrower. And then below me was like this 2,000-foot drop into the abyss, like into a classic Utah slot canyon, like the types of things you see in posters where you're like, that's a beautiful canyon. I was like, oh, this is really beautiful. But if I fall in here, like literally no one will ever find me because it's not, like you just be gone.
Yeah.
And I was somewhere that is not on trails. Like it literally is the middle of nowhere. There's no. And so this little ledge thing I was on kept getting smaller and smaller until it was kind of smaller than the size of half this desk, like this kind of width. And then there was a little tree coming up. And then I thought that I'd be able to sort of manage to get over this bulge. The bulge was getting smaller and smaller. And so I was kind of like, well, this is getting smaller. It's like, anyway, so I finally tried to tackle the bulge at a certain point, freaking broke a hold, fell off the bulge, landed on the tree, basically self-arrested on this tiny little thing, didn't go to the abyss, was like, whoa, that's really scary. And then, but then there's nothing. So then I just did it again because, I was like,
only way.
Yeah, only way. And so then made it over the bulge, carried on to the top. But then even when I got to the top, like finally made it to the rim of the canyon and, there's like a foot of snow as it turns out. And it was snowing. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to find this trail. I was like, I am totally fucked. And it was an 8-mile like long trek to get back to because there aren't that many ways in and out of the main canyon of Zion. Right. So you kind of have to go a long ways on the rim to find the descent back in. It's like the Grand Canyon, basically. Anyway, just by sheer good fortune, found the trail, found the thing, post-holed out in the snow. It's all pretty epic. Came down feeling totally fried. And that's just one random story. I literally have a story just like that from the next week in Zion when I did a different route in the same emotional state. And yeah, so it's, when I talk about managing fear, you're kind of like, man, if you're doing stuff like that a couple times a week for a couple of years, you just have a lot of scary experiences.
But there's something like beyond the fear is your appetite for risk that I'd like to explore, Alex, because I think the way you've described it as you're looking down the abyss is almost one end of the scale. But then there's the exhilaration of getting to the top of it or conquering El Cap and having and having that sense of achievement that you've gone beyond your comfort zone. Would you tell us what you've learned about risk that our audience could maybe take away and apply in their own world?
Well, I don't know. I think the key thing in managing risk is having like a frank evaluation, like, is it actually risky and how risky is it? Like trying to be rational about it. So much of free soloing is knowing when, you always have to stay within your own capabilities. So you have to be really honest about what your capabilities are.
Right.
And, no matter how rad you want to be, are you actually that rad? It's kind of the main thing. And so there are tons of things that you'd like to do, but realistically you shouldn't and you can't, and so, because that's kind of the interesting thing is that within the context of rock climbing, my free soloing is very conservative compared to my climbing with a rope. You know what I mean? Like when you're free soloing, you stay well within your abilities, you keep it comfortable, you're many grades below your actual physical max. Like you're,
Okay.
In general, free soloing is, I mean, you don't want to call it conservative because obviously it sounds totally insane and you're it's harrowing and all that. But really, compared to what you're able to do with a rope, you're trying to keep it pretty safe.
So how do you assess how rad you are then? Because in everyday life, people go, well, push yourself to the limit. And then when you fail, you've learned your lesson, you can go again. But you can't do that.
Well, no, so that's what you do in climbing as well, because most of the time you're climbing with a rope, most of the time you're climbing with partners. And so generally in climbing, you're failing all the time. And so you should have a pretty good sense of what your actual limits are. And then you back way, you back it up, and then that's your free soloing limit.
But there's like those stats that 50% of us believe that we're above average drivers, or like 80% of us believe that we're better in bed than most people. That kind of delusional
it's true for
stats.
Me.
Well, mate, yeah. But what I'm interested in is how do you avoid delusion? Because you're obviously risking life and limb.
Yeah, I mean that's the I don't know. I mean, I think you just have to be honest with yourself. Can you do this? And then also make sure you're not overextending yourself. You're not trying things that are too hard. I mean, one way to think about it. So with El Cap specifically, so I free soloed El Cap in 2017. I free climbed El Cap for the first time, which means with a rope, with a partner, all that. I think for the first time in 2007, maybe 2006. So it'd been 10 years since I'd climbed without a rope. And I think in that time, the very first time I climbed El Cap with a rope, sorry, I might have said that wrong, but the first time I climbed it with a rope, I think I took one fall on the crux pitch and then did a second go. So basically, it's like almost like free soloing. I'd only actually weighted the rope once. And then 10 years later, 10 years of consistent training and practice and preparation, all that, I finally felt ready to actually do it without a rope. And so when you think of it that way, you're like, well, that's pretty conservative. You could almost do it back then, and then 10 years later, you finally actually do it. That sort of oversimplifies it but whatever.
But why did you wait 10 years then? Because it must have been...
Because it's so freaking scary, because every time you look at El Cap, you're like, that is impossible. It's totally insane.
How many times did you visit it in that period?
Like every season. So like in those 10 years, I was going to Yosemite every spring and fall for probably 6 weeks each time. So I was in Yosemite maybe 3 months a year for the next 10 years. And so in 2008, I free soloed Half Dome, which is a wall next to El Cap, which is sort of one of my first big free solos. And so from then on, basically 2009 onward, every season, I would be like, maybe this is my year. And for the first, for the first 6 years or so, I kind of kept hoping that it would just happen. Like, this is going to be my year. I'm going to drive in, it's going to look easy, and I'm going to do it. And after 6 years, I was like, it's just never going to look easy. Every year you drive in and you're like, that looks totally impossible. It's really scary. Like, just thinking about it would make your stomach turn a little bit. And you're like, oh, geez.
So if you think, like, I often think of our ability to do something. If you think about expectation, ability, and consequences, that for us to perform at our capability, we need to almost have the expectation we're capable of it, the confidence in our ability to know we can, but then to almost have the ability to manage the consequences of not being able to do it. Would you talk us through those 3 areas then? So the expectation you had in 2007 was, that's too hard. You go back in 2009, you're still like, that's too hard. And every year after that, how did you start to make the expectation something that you could conquer?
I think for me, the thing that I finally decided after the 6 years or so was that, basically I realized that I was going to have to do all the prep work, like start acting as if I was going to free solo El Cap, even though I wasn't really sure if I could or not.
Okay.
Start doing all the preparation, do the training, do everything, and then see if it's possible. Right. Because with everything else I'd soloed, I'd kind of come into it thinking like, I can do this. I just need to prep for it. Like I had trained and practiced for some other free solos, but none to this scale. Yeah. And I'd always gone into them thinking like, I'm going to solo that, and then kind of making it happen. With El Cap, I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to solo that. Like, I'd like to solo that, but I don't know if I can. But I realized that I was going to have to basically jump through all the hoops first before determining whether or not I could. And so that's kind of like a fake it till you make it kind of thing, where I was like, okay, I'm just going to start doing all the things like as if I'm going to do it. Memorizing the sequences, training, whatever, all the things you need to do to feel comfortable on it. And then sort of make a decision later.
So what changed on the day when you decided I'm going up?
Well, it's not really at that point I'd been sort of working specifically on it for 2 years, and I was kind of like, I'm definitely going to do this.
Did you have a date in mind at that point then?
No, but your facing timing with the weather. So it was springtime. Springtime is much better to do it than the autumn, just because of where the sun is in the sky and how much sun the wall gets and how much shade you get. So the springtime is much more stable conditions. Like it feels more comfortable. You're in the shade much longer, but it's also warm enough that you feel good in the shade. And you don't have to climb in the dark. Like basically everything about the springtime is better.
Yeah.
But the thing with the springtime is that you're coming into summer. And so if you don't get it done, then it's just too hot. So I was trying to do all my prep work as quickly as possible, without it getting too hot.
So when you say, like, again, you said I had to learn a sequence. I appreciate there's almost the technical element of making sure you understand where your movements are. But I'm interested in the visualization side of that as well.
Yeah, well, in some ways, that's kind of the secret sauce to free soloing, I think, because memorizing the sequence is sort of the physical side. And that's the same as what you do if you're climbing with a rope. You just left hand here, right hand there, and memorize it. Though actually I soloed it quite a bit differently than I climbed with a rope because I tried to make it all feel more secure. Like there were a bunch of sections that actually I've gone back up there in the year since climbing with a rope for various reasons, climbing different parts of the wall and trying to do different things. And a few of the sections, when I tried to do them again with a rope, I was like, God damn, this is kind of strenuous, because I was basically doing things that were harder because they feel safer. And so from a soloing perspective, I was like, this is definitely the way I want to solo this. But then when you go back with your rope, you're like, wow, this is terrifically inefficient. You're like, I'm so tired. But anyway, that's a different thing. The visualization though, really that's what differentiates free soloing from rope climbing is this belief that you can do it without a rope, but there's no real way to practice that if you're only going to do it the one time. So visualization is the only way to practice ahead of time. And so that's imagining what it'll feel like without a rope, imagining even the psychological side, like how you'll feel when you look down and see your foot over the abyss, because the thing is you're looking down at your feet all the time. So you're frequently just looking at this 2,500 foot drop or, like 800 meters. You're like, oh, that's a lot of air. So thinking about all that stuff ahead of time so that when you get there, you're not taken by surprise or anything.
When you talk about sequencing, just to make it really clear, do you know the movements you're making from the very bottom to the top?
No, I know all the hard parts. So with El Cap, it's maybe a third hard, a third medium, and a third easy. The easy stuff, I don't even think about. It doesn't matter. You just paddle up it. The medium stuff, I know there's what climbers call the crux to each pitch. So if a pitch is, say, 50 meters of, say, 5'10" climbing, of that 50 meters, maybe 5 of the meters will be the hard part. And so the other 45, I kind of know how to climb it, but I don't have to know all the moves because I'll just flow up it either way. And then the 5 meters of the crux, let's say, I'll know, like I'll remember exactly how to do it. And then the third of the climb that was really hard, that I know all of it basically.
Right. And that reminds us of, we interviewed an explorer in the UK called Ash Dykes, who one of the techniques that he does when he does expeditions is he looks at, well, what could kill me? What are the moments on this expedition where I could actually die? And then he not only does the visualization that you describe, he then sort of ladles it in Technicolor with how am I going to feel? How am I going to get out of this?
Yeah,
when you describe those like that third bit where it gets hard, would you tell us how you go about addressing that?
No, I definitely think about all that as well. Like, where are the places where if my foot slipped, I would just die? And then also what would happen if my foot did slip? Because, most people, when they're visualizing, like, oh, and then you slip and you fall. And you just fall. But on El Cap, you don't just fall. You basically ragdoll down the wall because most of it is less than vertical. So you're basically bouncing down a less than vertical wall and occasionally hitting ledges and bouncing off things. And and there have been people who have fallen off El Cap in various ways, like when ropes get cut and accidents happen and things. And so that it's like a complete disaster. So visualizing that appropriately, it's like the crux boulder problem, if you've seen the film with the karate kick and all that stuff. That's 2,300 feet up the wall or something. But if you miss the move, you're only going to fall like 30-ish meters basically clean until you bounce off this ledge where you'll break both your legs and hopefully pass out. And then it's all disaster from there. You're going to, explode like a water balloon at the base after bouncing off a bunch of things. Like, it's horrible. And so, I think for me, visualizing all of that so that you really know, basically because you just don't want to be up there and then for the first time be like, man, if I fell here, I'd hit that ledge down there. Like, you want to know that you're going to hit that ledge already. Like, you want to have already thought it through and still have decided to do it despite knowing exactly what would happen.
So you're really visualizing there the single worst thing that could happen to you.
Yeah, and also the best though. I mean, you also visualize getting to the summit and being like, I'm the man.
Of course.
It's like, I mean, of course, you visualize the full spectrum of possibility.
But on the negative side, if you've visualized it in the detail that you have, does that mean those thoughts don't come into your head when you're up there?
You need to hear this, okay? Your gut matters. It's a vital building block to health. Now, you might not know that 70% of your immune system is in your gut. I didn't know that. And 95% of serotonin, which is the feel-good chemical, is created in your gut. And if there's one thing we need more of, it's a feel-good chemical, right? That's why when it came to choosing a probiotic, I had to know it was proven and that I could fully trust it. And this is it. Biotic by Heights, specifically formulated to give you everything you need for your gut, your mind, and your immune system. I take it every day, and the difference for me is real. And you could trust me, fine, cool, or you could trust the tens of thousands of high performers and elite athletes that rely on Biotic every day. So join tens of thousands of high performers and try Heights with an exclusive 20% off your first month, only with this podcast. Go to heights.com/HP or enter the code HP20 at checkout. You'll love it.
I think at least for me, I'm less likely to have those thoughts when I'm up there. I'm less likely to have sort of intrusive thoughts where I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, that's crazy. Because you're like, I've thought about all the things that could happen. I've thought about all the worst case scenarios. I've set that aside. Like I've processed that already. And now I can focus on, and in the case of the boulder problem, it allowed me to basically think about nothing when I did it. I just climbed, which was kind of the ideal, the flow state, whatever. But like autopilot, I just did what I was supposed to do.
I love this idea of visualizing that you're a man as well.
Well, you don't set out on a multi-year project like that without imagining like how good it'll feel to finish it, to get to the top and be like, yes.
So here's the thing, you can visualize pretty much all of it because you've done it with a rope. You can't visualize the feeling when you pop over at the top and you've done it. So I wonder how the visualization of I'm the man actually compared to how it felt.
Oh, I don't know. I actually don't remember visualizing that much, but I'm sure I must have, thought about it a lot. I thought about it a lot because I knew that freestyling El Cap would be a very important thing in climbing history just because El Cap is so central to climbing history and there have been a lot of other important things on El Cap. And I was like, I just want to do something. I don't know.
What went through your head as you come over the top then?
Well, it was more like over the last 20 minutes or so, it gets kind of easier toward the last couple hundred feet are relatively easy. And so it was kind of like a victory lap, when you're just like, you're running your last little thing, being like, I'm so psyched. So in a way, when I crested the summit, it wasn't like all at once. I'm like, oh, elated. It was like basically the last half hour, I was like steadily getting more and more like, this is so great. I'm so psyched.
And was that the mastery that you were seeking?
Yeah, basically. El Cap probably is the most positive climbing experience I've ever had. And that's largely because I put so much effort into it, so much time into it. And that's partially because there was the film crew involved. Because I think had it been just me, there's a decent chance I would have just forced it sooner. Because I think when you're by yourself, I'm at least a little bit more prone to just roll the dice a little bit when I'm totally by myself. To be like, this doesn't feel comfortable, but I'll just force it. Whereas when there are people watching you and filming you, you're a little more like, I should do this properly. This slightly, I don't want to be embarrassed. But so I think because of the whole process of the filmers and all that, I wound up putting more effort into it than I maybe would have otherwise. And as a result, it felt incredible.
Yeah. We spoke to a guy that had scaled Everest 16 times.
16?
Yeah, a guy called Kenton Cool. And he told us that,
I've heard of him.
Yeah, and he told us that the two most dangerous times of climbing are when you can see the summit and then on your way down from the summit because you naturally relax. It's nearly within grasp or it's in grasp and you feel I've achieved it. So
that's more the case with high altitude mountaineering. Like with what I'm describing, that's like not really relevant because it basically gets easier with high altitude mountaineering. It's getting more and more dangerous with each step because you're getting less oxygen and time wise you're out longer. Like all those kinds of things add up. So if you're climbing big mountains, that's definitely true. But for what I'm describing, basically once you get past the hardest parts of the wall, a lot of the rest of it is basically exit climbing. You're just like, I'm just going to the top. I'm having a great time.
But I'm still interested in how you avoid complacency because you're still dealing with high stakes.
Yeah, I hear you. I think to some extent, when you're free soloing, you're never that complacent. You know what I mean? It's like you're always aware that if you slip, you're going to die. And so you're always pretty on. Like even when you're relaxed and having a great time, you're still pretty tight, which is kind of, which is part of the pleasure of free soloing, is because you really feel like you're on the whole time. You're like, I'm doing this and I'm doing this well.
So that's the granular level of looking at a moment as you scale it. I'd like to zoom out and talk about the fact that this was a several-year project before you ended up doing it. And I'm interested in, how did you go about so the goal of scaling it is obvious, that you wouldn't be the guy that gets to the top and free soloing it and you have your I am the man moment. But I'm interested in, how did you go about setting targets or goals for yourself to sustain your enthusiasm for this over the several years?
Yeah, totally. So part of it was that I did literally just set a bunch of sort of checkmark goals for myself along the way, like other free soloing goals, several of which you see in the film Free Solo.
Yeah.
Though a bunch of them are sort of relegated to B-roll, just like scenic shots of soloing, but those were all like big things for me at the time. They're all very difficult. In the film Free Solo, there's a little Morocco segment where I climb several walls with my friend Tommy Caldwell, and then I soloed this wall in Morocco. And basically all of that is just B-roll in the film, so they can sort of introduce the crew and talk about. We were in Morocco a freaking month, and we did like this thing that never been done before, and then I soloed this thing that never been done. It was all incredibly like cutting edge climbing. And it's relegated to a couple minutes of B-roll while they introduce the builders.
You're watching it thinking, come on, guys.
Yeah, totally.
This is so much more than that. Yeah.
No, I had, tagine diarrhea for like a month trying to climb big walls in Morocco. And I was sort of like, oh, it's just 5 minutes of B-roll? You're like, come on. But it made the film better that way. Obviously, that's fine. But so we did a bunch of very difficult climbing. I'd set all these goals for myself, things that I wanted to do, things that made sense. And then actually one of the things though, so free soloing El Cap was obviously a multi-year goal. And this is kind of an interesting thing that because free soloing is so psychological, I didn't want to build it up too big because, I didn't want to put it on too high of a pedestal. It's like, this is the most important thing I'll ever do, because I didn't want to overweight it in a way.
Yeah.
Like it already was a huge undertaking. I didn't need to make it even bigger in my mind. And so part of the way that I tried to avoid that was by keeping it in the broader context of professional climbing, like expeditions throughout the year, other trips, other goals, like other things that I was trying to do. And so free soloing El Cap was something that mattered a lot to me, but I was still planning other things around it. So the year that I soloed El Cap, basically right after I soloed El Cap, like the week later, I went to Alaska for this expedition with some friends of mine, and then we climbed some new routes in Alaska. And that was kind of training for an expedition I did later in the year where we went to Antarctica and climbed a bunch of walls. And so it's kind of like, which is normal as a professional climber to sort of set like, I'll go to Alaska to sort of practice some things, which will be good training for this other trip later in the year. And so obviously I wanted to solo El Cap, but I already had the whole rest of my year sort of planned out with other trips, other expeditions, like things going on. And so it kept it sort of in its proper place.
Yeah.
I was like, I really want to do this, but if I don't, I'm still going to Alaska and I'm still training for Antarctica and I'm still doing these other things. And so I think that helped keep it from becoming too big in my mind.
And was there ever a moment where that when you go after a target, it's referred to as Cantor's Law, where everything feels like a failure in the middle, where you're too far in the planning to abandon it, but you're not far enough?
What's that called again? Say that again.
Called Cantor's Law.
Cantor's Law?
It's named after a Harvard business professor called Ross Cantor.
Okay.
That says you're too far in to abandon the plan, but you're not far enough quite yet to see the end point. And that's where morale declines, people's patience wears out.
Definitely experienced all that.
So tell us how you got through it.
Well, so you see it in the film Free Solo. I sprained my ankle, and then there's a kind of this lull. I thought I was going to do it in the autumn, but then I kind of hurt myself, and I just wasn't quite able to execute, and conditions weren't great, and there were a bunch of things, but basically didn't happen. And so then I wound up doing it the next spring, so 6 months later, which in retrospect, I'm like, 6 months, who cares? Like 6 months in this multi-year journey, like doesn't matter. And as a result, I actually was better prepared, better trained, and all worked out much better for me. But during those 6 months, I was like, oh, I'm just the biggest failure, because like I'd wanted to do this thing, I hadn't done the thing. I tried to maintain morale by sort of like, well, like my quote unquote failed attempt on El Cap that you see in the film where I climb partway and then give up. I looked at that as like, well, at least I hiked up to El Cap with just a day bag and started climbing, because just getting off the ground in your climbing shoes is kind of a big mental step. Because like to start climbing El Cap with no rope feels like a milestone.
Did you see it as a failure?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I mean, kind of. I mean, I always maintained because it's very common in climbing to not do a thing that you're trying to do because of conditions or whatever else.
Yeah.
Like it just rains that season or something. And so it's very common to just be like, well, I'm coming back next season. And I'd experienced that with a bunch of other big solos, like this route in Squamish, which is in British Columbia, like outside of Vancouver. I'd spent 3 summers there. It's kind of like the Yosemite of the North. It's like a little baby Yosemite, like tiny. It's like a tiny El Cap, but it's cool. It's granite walls. It's cooler in the summer, and that's like where you go when you're living in your van. And there's a specific route there that I'd been wanting to solo, sort of as a precursor for El Cap. It's like a mini version of the same style of difficulty, and I think it'd been either 2 or 3 years that I wanted to do it, but the most difficult section often seeps, like water comes out of it, and it just doesn't quite dry enough to feel comfortable. You can do it with a rope fine, but it just feels too slick for soling. And so I'd sat on it for a couple seasons, and then finally actually had a season where actually, and even the season that I did do it, I showed up early in the season and did all my prep work for it. I was like, I'm going to solo at the U-wall. It's called the University Wall. It's like, I'm soloing the U-wall. And so I did the prep work. I climbed it a couple times, memorized the sequences, sorted it all out. And then I just like wasn't quite able to pull the trigger. I was like, no, it's too scary. And then I just climbed normally with my friends, an ex-girlfriend at the time, like basically just climbed for 6 weeks or so. And then toward the end of the trip was like, today's my day, and just went and did it. I was kind of like, sometimes you just sit on stuff for a long time.
So patience is a really important part of your armor, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, kind of maybe the long-term confidence, like I will do this, I can do this.
Did you ever think you would?
Did
you ever think that maybe El Cap free soloing wouldn't happen?
No, I mean, I think I always kind of believed that with enough time and effort and whatever that it would happen.
Yeah.
I think.
Can we talk about...
But I was open to it not happening as well. It's kind of like...
Were you?
I mean, I think so. It's hard to say. I mean, I always acted as if I was going to free solo El Cap. I was always on this path. But I kind of knew that if it didn't... I mean, along the way, there were a bunch of parts of the wall that took a lot more effort than expected. And there were a few sections that I never really did like, and I found ways to go around them. And so I sort of, like, there are a couple little sections on the wall that I just circumvented. And it took me a long time to come up with the variations, which is a whole different thing because you're just used to going where you go with the rope. And where you climb with the rope is sort of determined by where there's protection, like where there are bolts or where you can put gear in. But once I realized that I was climbing without a rope anyway, I was like, I can go anywhere I want on the wall because it doesn't make any difference. Like either way, if I fall, I'm going to die. So why stick to the prescribed line? And so then I started casting a wider net and like looking way around. And so I found ways to go around a couple of the parts that I didn't like.
You've spoken a lot, but very briefly about, I did the preparation, I did the training, I got myself ready. Would you take us inside that side of things, away from climbing, to prepare yourself physically for what El Cap?
Well, it still is climbing. I mean, the physical preparation is still just climbing. I mean, for free solo El Cap, I also got a little tighter with my diet. I was eating like mostly vegan diet with eggs. I cut dessert mostly, basically I was just eating well, very well. Getting my sleep, like doing extra core, stretching all the time, doing all that kind of stuff. But mostly I was climbing all the time.
And that was the preparation?
Yeah, that's the preparation. I mean, I was climbing as hard as I could all the time. Like as a climber, I typically climb 2 on, 1 off, like 2 hard days, 1 rest day, 2 hard days, 1 rest day. And part of that's because your skin gets worked and, there are a lot of things. But then on my rest days, I was going and soloing big, easy routes, like cardio soloing, like scrambling up mountains and things like that, and just doing a ton of volume. So I was like climbing all the time.
And were there specific moments in the climb that you had to kind of train for and just get yourself ready for? I saw you talk somewhere about you practiced a specific stretch.
Yeah, so like the karate kick on the boulder problem, you span your left foot like way over to a corner over there, and basically the more limber your leg feels, the easier it is to reach out to the corner. So I've been doing a ton of stretching. I'm still not particularly flexible, or actually I'm probably average. Like I'm not inflexible.
I think you're okay.
Actually, I'm probably better than average, but I'm not flexible. You know what I mean? Like I'm not, like some of my friends just busting into the splits, and I'm like, I can't do that. But yeah, so I was stretching all the time for that specific move. There's actually, there's this thing to monster off with in the middle of the wall. That's this big gaping wide crack that you have to sort of worm your way up. You like wedge half your body in and push really hard. It takes a ton of counter pressure and just kind of like opposition muscles. That thing, I was doing some like TRX style workouts and sort of like core workouts because I found that when I climbed that section with a rope, I would normally come out the top feeling like a limp noodle. I feel like Jello. I'd feel like all my joints were like loose, and then the hardest climbing is all above that. And so I was like, I knew that for soloing, I needed to come out the top and feel whole, like feel normal. And so I did a bunch of core and stuff to make sure my body would like stay tight when I got through that.
I mean, a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, Alex, is the nurture, how you develop the mindset and the physical capabilities to do something so extraordinary. I'd like to switch focus to the nature element of it and think a little bit about, you were born to climb mountains in many ways. It sounds like, but what was your background that ignited this spark of interest for you to do that?
I think, I now have 2 daughters, so I've been thinking about this kind of thing a lot, like nature versus nurture and how much, and like what I have, what do I have that is natural, like that just comes to me. I mean, I think that the biggest thing is that I've just always loved climbing, and I love the movement of it. I love the sensation of it. Like I love being up high. Like I love the exposure. Like I like air below me. I like standing on top of place structures and like getting up on roofs and things like that. And so I think that's natural, like an innate desire to be in those kinds of positions. And I think that innate desire has sort of allowed me to do the volume of training required to actually do some of the hard things.
Yeah.
Because I just love, I love the grind. Like I love doing it every day. Except my fingers kind of hurt today. Like I probably won't climb today, but like my shit's all achy. But that's because I climbed the last several days pretty hard, and I'm just tired. But I love the process of it, and I think that's what's really. And then combined with maybe some psychological sides of like, if you're going to do something, do it well, and things, like, which maybe is perfectionism. I mean, some of that's probably my mom basically speaking through me because she's kind of a psycho. So I think I ingrained some of that.
Explain more on that.
Like a presque ne compte pas, like she only speaks French to us, but it means, almost doesn't count. Like sayings like that, like all these little like ingrained sayings, like good enough isn't, things like that. Like all these little, it's like now as an adult, you're like, that's psycho. But it does instill a sense of perfectionism or whatever you want to call it.
And at what age were you getting those messages from your mum?
Well, probably from freaking birth, Like, I don't know, I don't remember, but.
Can you give us an example of where as a child, you heard that isn't good enough? Or
I mean, I honestly don't really remember. It's weird too because my sister and I both got perfect grades, like did all the things. I was a nationally ranked athlete. I was a climber, but I went to some of the youth competitions and things. So like I opted out of physical education in high school because I was a nationally ranked athlete, and PE, I was taking all like honors classes. So it's like you weights your GPA. And I was like, well, PE isn't weighted. So it's dragging down my GPA. So I like opted out of PE. It's like that kind of like psycho, like over. Yeah. But so, I mean, I don't think there was actually a ton of like criticism at home or anything, because we were both doing great. But that was just sort of the expectation. Like you're going to do really well.
Was there a lot of love?
I mean, not really. It's hard to say. But part of it's because my parents like stayed married for the kids for too long, which in retrospect, like the sort of thing where they're in a bad place, they're not in a good relationship, but they're just kind of like dragging it out because they're like, oh, we're going to stay together until the kids get through high school. And in retrospect, you're like, they should have divorced when we were like 6 and they had happier lives and probably would have been better.
And what was the consequences of growing up in a household like that?
Well, I mean, I think, I don't know. I mean, shape me into the man. Like, who knows? But I mean, now being in a happy marriage myself and seeing my wife's family and how loving they are and how supportive they are, I'm sort of like, wow, that's really different than the way we were raised.
But that's the interesting thing. You would have had, if love was lacking in your household, you probably had no idea because that's your only life.
No,
right?
That's exactly. And I thought it was totally normal. That's all. It's only as an adult that you look back and you're like, huh, that seems really different.
So so looking back as an adult, what's the thing you look back on that period and think that was really different?
Oh, just like nobody hugged, nobody exchanged kisses, there's like no touching in the house. There's very little, no words of affection. There's basically no signs of, it was a very sterile home environment, But.
And how's that impacted, or how did that impact your relationship with other people as you got older and needed to form your own relationships?
I don't know, but I mean, specifically to climbing though, I mean, I was, and this is probably innate, I was very shy and just very introverted and not great with people. And so I think, part of that helped steer me towards soloing a little bit, just because as I started climbing full time, I was very hesitant to talk to strangers. And so then you're much more likely to go out by yourself and just scramble, like figure it out yourself. I don't know.
I also think, sometimes we can look at our upbringing or things that happen in our past and see all the negative or all the stuff that we're not happy about. But there's probably a pretty fair argument that the type of upbringing that you had is pretty vital to the life that you're living now.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't complain at all. And I wouldn't change anything either. I'm like, I'm great. I'm happy. I'm leading exactly the life that I'd love to live. Like, I think it's all great. And my parents did provide a ton of very positive things for my lifestyle as well, like outdoor experiences, going camping, going to the mountains. I went to Yosemite as a kid. I grew up in Sacramento, so it's only 3 or 4 hours away. And just, my dad taking me to the gym all the time, like starting at age 10, I was going to the climbing gym all the time. And he wasn't a climber, but he would belay me, and then he would climb a little bit just to sort of, so I could rest. And he'd belay me like 3 or 4 routes, and he would do one just to like break it up, and then I would do a couple more. And then I was like, they put a lot, and we didn't want for anything, like we were taken care of and well educated. You're like, oh, it's a great life that I wouldn't change. But I think when you start to examine the psychological underpinning of free soloing, you're sort of like, oh, there's probably something there.
Sure. I think so. And what would you do? So what's the one thing you do differently with your own children than what you experienced?
The main difference is maintaining a good relation with my wife, because my wife is incredible. And she's like, in some ways, even if I acted exactly like my parents, if I can maintain a good relationship with my wife, then it's like going to be balanced enough. You know what I mean? It's like, as long as you have somebody in the house that deeply loves the children, and I don't know, it's like good yin and yang. But I'm good with the kids. I'm supportive. I snuggle. I play.
There's hugs in the
they're hugs
Honnold
in the house,
household.
Yeah, they're actually my 2-year-old is like really not into. She'll never snuggle or anything.
Really?
She always like jumps up and runs away and does stuff.
You're like, come here, give dad a cuddle. Come on.
Yeah, and she's like, no,
not happening. I'm interested in the role your wife's played in this. What do you reflect is the biggest lessons that she's taught you about life?
I think the biggest lesson maybe that I've gotten from my wife is kind of this, and I think maybe there might be some quote to this effect in Free Solo. I kind of forget, or she explores the idea in the film, but kind of like, why not have it all? Like, why not? Like, and this is specific to a lot of my free soloing in the past has been sort of based on this like angsty, like you just need to get into this, like, the dark, tormented artist kind of mindset and just like do this thing. And she was like, why not do the same things, but be happy? And I was like, like I never really considered doing that. Like, why not come at it from a positive perspective and just, do the exact same things, but have a stable relationship and a good home life and be happy while you do it. And I was like, that's somehow less glamorous, but it is a lot nicer.
So what would the approach have been like before she said that then?
Well, the approach, I think before I dated and then married my wife, I blew up several good relationships, sort of just as a way of generating angst or sort of like, or maybe, who knows why you don't get too psychological, but like not thinking that you deserve it, not thinking you're worth it, like who knows why, but just like blowing up things that like didn't need to be blown up.
How many times did you do that?
Oh, I had this on and off girlfriend that we both like blew things up for like years, at least once a year somebody would blow it up and there'd be like a couple months of drama and like, and I often sort of channel that drama intentionally to go do things that I wanted to do. And so it wasn't totally, because actually within climbing lore, like within climbing history, there are tons of examples of people who like break up with significant others and then go out and solo things as like, don't care if I live or die kind of thing.
Like burn your bridges sort of thing.
Well, like there are just tons of sort of legendary climbing stories of somebody like, oh, my girlfriend dumped him and he just went out and he sold this thing because he like didn't care if he was going to die. And I've never been like that. I always care if I'm going to die. Like I don't want to die.
Right.
But I'll still harness the motivation where you're like, oh, there's all this emotional drama going on. I'm going to use that to go do this thing that I've been wanting to do for years or months, but have been sitting on because it's still not, I'm not really sure.
So do you feel, there's that old quote from the boxer Marvin Hagler that said it's difficult to get up and run when you're wearing silk pajamas. So is it difficult to free solo when you've got a happy family life and all the trappings of domestic bliss?
Yeah, a little bit. Though sometimes I wonder if it actually will make it easier because I'll just be like, oh, thank God, like a good change of pace from toddlers and just me and a wall and just doing the thing I love to do. It's hard to say. In the 2 years since I've had kids, I guess I've done one big soloing project, but even that was kind of more like ultra climbing, like a ultra endurance thing. It wasn't like elite, difficult free soloing. It was more like, I mean, I still free soloed a ton, but it was more like up and down all these mountains. Done a couple of things like that, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say though, because I wonder about that, because I often wonder like, oh, am I getting soft in middle age? You know, it's like, is this all the stereotypical, you have kids and you get soft? But I think for me, part of it is that I have actually free soloed most of the things that I want to free solo. At least in the Western US, like all the things within range, I've kind of done. I think, you know, you don't want to like sound douchey, but I'm like, I mostly have done my life list. And so if I moved to Europe, let's say, if I was like living near the Dolomites, if I was near somewhere that had like a rich history of soloing and tons of things to solo, I'd probably be more into it. But like here in Red Rock, I don't know if you guys saw, you know, we're in Vegas. Red Rock is nearby. I've soloed all the classic things in Red Rock. And a year or two ago, I went to start dabbling on this thing that's sort of like B team or maybe C team. You know, it's not classic. It's cool. It's good. I'd like to solo it. I tried it a few times and I was like, this just isn't worth it. You know, I was like, this is like B team at best, maybe C team.
Right.
I was like, the rock quality's not that great. And I'm like, I just don't want to fall to my death off something that I don't really care about. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know. So I think, yeah, I need the right objectives at this point.
So do you think having children has changed your relationship with free soloing?
Having children has definitely changed my relationship with time, you know, because I'm trying to be at home for bedtime and you know, mornings and basically like way more time at home. And so then I set my climbing goals a little bit differently because I want to set goals that are sort of attainable with the lifestyle that I'm trying to live right now. And so, and also, I mean, we just had 2 kids in the last 2 years. And so my wife's been pregnant through the 2. It's like, it's been a, you know, couple years that you're sort of like, oh, it's not great to be away for long periods of time. Though that said, I've still done 2 giant expeditions in the last 2 years. but you just don't want to set like crazy soloing goals that are all encompassing.
But just to be clear, like, you know, I'm sure you know this, when you type Alex Honnold into Google, it comes up with, has Alex Honnold retired? Is Alex Honnold ever going to solo again? Is Alex Honnold finished climbing? What is the answer to that?
Oh, no, I'm climbing all the time. I mean, just like a couple of days ago, I soloed a 1,000-foot route in my tennis shoes in 30 minutes, you know, with a couple of friends.
Just for
well, because like some friends and I, we were in Bishop on this family climbing vacation. Yeah. We were like climbing for fun. And some friends and I went around into this little canyon and climbed this really hard thing. And actually, I did this thing first try that I was pretty proud of. It's basically the hardest that I've climbed first try in like 8 years or something. So I was like, oh, I feel strong, feel good. And then we'd sort of finished our climbing there. And just around the corner from it was a route that the local people in that town keep ropes on like year round. So it's got like 1,000 feet of rope going up it. So it means that you can go by yourself and clip into the rope and just climb it. And so people in town use it as like a workout thing. But I was kind of like, well, one, I didn't have the device to clip into the rope with, but also I was like, I don't really care. So I climbed it ropeless and then just rappelled down it. But so 3 of my friends climbed it with the ropes and I climbed in front of them just like charging, you know, put on some music and just charged. I was like, God, I love doing that kind of stuff. It's so fun.
Brilliant.
But
can you take us into the conversation? Because we were talking about, that was a family vacation that you were on. So can you invite us into the conversation with your wife when you're saying, I'm just going to scale that there. I've got my tennis shoes on. I've not got the stuff to clip into the rope. What does she say to you?
Well, in this case, she wasn't there. And, you know, I told her after, but no, she knows that that's totally chill for me. She's like, I bet that was really fun. I mean, she was pretty happy because it was me and 3 of my sort of oldest climbing friends all climbing this thing together. And it felt like the old days in Yosemite or something. I was like, oh, just monkeys like scrambling. It was so fun. It's like, this is great. And I mean, it is terrifically efficient. You know, I made it up in 30 minutes. We rappelled down in 15. I was back at the car. You know, basically it took under an hour to climb a 1,000-foot wall and then drive back to the fam. And in a lot of ways, you're like, that is the ideal way to do exercise as a young dad. It's like,
we're about to move on to our quickfire questions. But before we get there, I just want to just sort of find out where you are now psychologically and mentally, because, you know, we've spoken about this young guy lacking a bit of love and affection in his home life, and then a guy that maybe channeled that into some early relationships and exploding them and needing to go and solo incredible things to sort things out in your head at times. Now you've achieved, you know, more than any climber has ever achieved in history. Your notoriety is incredible. You're a father of 2. So where are you at now in your head? Like your self-worth, your happiness, your serenity?
Oh, I think all a lot healthier. I mean, just all a lot better. I mean, a lot of that I think is a product of the healthy relationship with my wife for the last 8 years. I'm like, has it been, fuck, it makes me feel old. Like, has it been that long? Like, geez. But yeah, I mean, I think much more stable, much more relaxed, much, which in some ways makes the climbing almost more fun. I don't know. I mean, sometimes it makes you worry that you've lost the edge. But I'm like, I don't know. I mean, just last week, I climbed one of the hardest things that I've done in a long time and climbing well. And so it's sort of like, maybe you don't need the angst in order to climb well. It's hard to know.
But you also need to be comfortable with the fact that one day the edge will go. One day you will not have the physical ability to climb those. And you're still you. You're far more than a guy that free solos.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part I'm still coming to grips with. Just the whole coming to terms, aging. I mean, I think I'm not quite. No, I mean, obviously I'm already a lot older than I was in my 20s, and like I already feel it, like just not recovering quite as fast. But I don't think that I've begun the full decline yet. I'm gonna shoot for like Tom Brady style, a couple more years. It's just
so. But if I was to ask you in terms of identity, and there's 3 titles we've heard. We've spoke about you as a partner, as a parent, and as a climber. Where would you rank those 3 in order of importance today?
I still think of myself as a climber first, and then family man second. Sort of relationship and parenting to me are kind of the same right now, just because the kids are so small. And but no, I mean, I actually sort of think of my life as climbing, work, and family. It's sort of like the 3 things.
In that order?
Oh no, climbing, family, and work, or maybe family, climbing, and work. Work's always, I mean, it's like it goes. I mean, work is really to support the family and the climbing habit. I mean, the reason I have sponsors and all that stuff is so that I can climb full time. But climbing has always been first, and I suspect the family will overtake it at some point. Maybe they're sort of neck and neck at this point.
Very good. Before those questions, we once interviewed a guy called Johnny Wilkinson. He's probably the most famous rugby player in the UK. He won the Rugby World Cup for England. And he said that now he's retired. For him now, he's got to a point where doing the washing up is as important as winning the Rugby World Cup. And we asked...
He definitely lied to you.
Well, I'm not sure. His answer was, what is winning the Rugby World Cup using your body to achieve a goal? And what is doing the washing up using your body to achieve a goal? So why is one more important than the other? And if I'm no longer a rugby player, which he wasn't at the time, if I'm no longer a rugby
definitely
player,
just justifying his new lifestyle to himself. He's just doing some mental gymnastics to make his new lifestyle feel okay to him.
You can't.
You're like,
can't
no,
get
obviously winning the Rugby World Cup is a peak life experience, and washing up you do every day. You're like, who cares? I mean, and I think about this all the time because my responsibility. So this morning I woke up before the 2-year-old, used the opportunity to finish cleaning the kitchen, unload the dishwasher, take out the compost, do all the things. Like basically I have a whole morning routine where I like keep the house in order. And, I take some satisfaction in making sure the trash gets out and all that kind of stuff. But it's not as satisfying as free-soloing all cap. You're like, come on. It's like, I mean, it feels like a bit of a grind, really, because it's like I'm just doing all my morning chores every morning. I'm like, I'm up with the sunrise, doing morning chores. Like, it's nice to feel like you're doing the right thing and you're helping the family, but it's not a freaking peak life experience every day.
I look forward to chatting to you in 20 years when you go, do you know what, I took out the trash today? That's just as important to me as when I was climbing El Cap.
No, that is for sure BS.
Can I just go back and explore that ranking list that you told us, a climber first, then family second?
Well, or neck and neck,
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be at all surprised as I get worse at climbing and better at parenting, as the kids are older and actually do more with the kids, I'm sure family will probably overtake. I mean, everybody says that when they're older, that their family's the thing they're most proud of. And I'm ready to get there, but with a 2-month-old, I'm not doing a lot besides cleaning up her vomit and changing her diapers.
But have you ever had that conversation with your wife in terms of the priority list?
Oh yeah, when we started dating, it was, we, just by sheer coincidence of timing, we met right as I started filming for Free Solo.
Okay.
So from the very beginning of our relationship, I was involved in this totally insane documentary film process and engaged in, what was the biggest climbing challenge of my life. And so from the beginning of the relationship, she kind of knew that I was in the midst of this whole climbing journey and that the relationship was obviously second. And a lot of people see that in the film. They're like, that guy's a douche. And you're like, yeah, I mean, I was kind of a douche, or like not the kindest partner in some of those moments. But you're also like, you got to bear in mind that it was, I'm 6 months into a relationship with this, young woman who's great, but you're kind of like, it's just a random person you're dating versus this project that you've been working on for 10 years. You're like, obviously you're going to put this lifetime climbing project first. You know, people watch the film and you're like, how can you be so mean to that person? And you're like, well, look, I mean, obviously your priorities are climbing first at that point. And I kind of always said that.
And has she ever asked you to switch the priority list around?
Well, I think the main difference is that now she kind of gets a say in all the climbing projects. You know, I think at the time when we started dating, I was just like, here's the path that I'm on. Here are the things that I'm going to climb. This is what it takes to prepare for Freestyle on Cap. Like, this is all laid out. Now I kind of come to her, you know, now we're a team. I mean, we're a family. And so I lay out the sort of buffet of like, here are the things that I'd like to do. Here are the seasons in which they're good. Here's this potential project. Here's a potential expedition. You know, this would mean that I'll be away for this amount of time. You know, what do you think is the appropriate?
Yeah.
And then we sort of come to a decision together. And so, you know, climbing is still very important, but she gets at least some say in it, you know.
Perfect. Right, some quick fire questions.
Hit me.
The 3 non-negotiable behaviors that you and ideally the people around you should buy into.
Is this quick fire?
Yeah.
3 non-negotiable behaviors. I don't know. Attention to detail.
Yeah, quite important.
Yeah, my wife and I both sort of hark on that. We're both pretty detail oriented. That I want the people around me to have.
Ideally. They don't have to, but it can be just yours if you prefer.
I don't know, like what's the term for doing things correctly? You know, like, I mean, that's kind of like attention to detail, but like
I know what you mean, yeah. You can have that as your second one. I'll grant you that one.
Yeah, like doing things right. I don't know. Having a good time. I mean, it's like, you know, I like all my climbing partners, like people you're going to spend a lot of time with, like people who are lighthearted about it that you can like have fun with.
What advice would you give to a teenage Alex just starting out?
Specifically to me as a teenager, it would have been to do some specific types of training sooner, and to not. I went to university for a year. I just shouldn't have bothered. You know, I should have just carried on doing what I was doing. A couple of things like that. I kind of wish I'd done some high school sports, like had more of a running base or a swimming base, like other types of movement, just to round out my athleticism, like, you know, things like that. But that's not like general advice I'd give to anybody. But that's just specifically for my path.
No sort of psychological advice for your younger self to deal with the world and what's about to come?
Oh no, I don't think so. I think the journey is important. You know, it's like I think it all went fine.
What's your biggest strength? What's your greatest weakness?
I think my greatest strength is maybe consistency, just doing the things, I don't know, just grinding away, like continuing to do it day in and day out and trying. Greatest weakness, I mean, it's maybe been the tendency to sort of blow things up from time to time, or like sort of self-destructive behavior, like, and not in a big sense because I've never done like drugs or alcohol, and I don't actually self-destruct in the way that a lot of people self-destruct.
Yes.
But you know, like binge on desserts or stay up too late and like random things from time to time. Where you're just kind of like, and you know that you just shouldn't. You know that you should just go to bed at 8 and get your night's sleep, but instead you're like, but I just want to finish watching the show or whatever, and you're like, you know, it's dumb, but you do it anyway. I think I've done a lot of things like that where I'm like, you know, it's not the right choice, but you just do it anyway because you're like, F the man, I'm going to do what I want. And then later you're like, I should have just done what the man told me.
What's the single best piece of advice you've ever received and why?
I mean, since we were just talking about climbing, work, family as the 3 aspects of life, I mean, I have some friends who have always talked about juggling the balls, and that realistically you can only ever keep 2 in the air at the same time.
Yeah.
When you're juggling. So you can do 2 of those 3 things well, but you can't do all 3 well. And now, as I'm more of a family man and working more on all those things, I think of that all the time. Where I'm sort of like, I can maintain one and do the other 2 well if I try really hard. Or I can do one well and sort of maintain 2. But you just can't do all 3 well at the same time. So you kind of have to choose your seasons.
And finally, a bit of advice from you to our audience, from the incredible things you've experienced and the life you've lived. What would you leave people thinking about as your one golden rule to living a high-performance life?
I have no idea. But I mean, I guess for this kind of audience, if you're really trying to think about leading a high-performance life, I would think honestly about what's holding you back from it and then sort of rationally evaluate whether or not. I mean, because so many people are held back by fear in different ways. Is that fear founded? Does that matter? Like maybe you should just do the thing you've been wanting to do. It's like, what's to lose? You know, or like, yeah, like you've been wanting to sign up for a marathon, but you're sort of afraid because whatever. You're like, who freaking cares? Sign up. You can literally walk the whole way. It doesn't make any difference. Like just do the thing. Just like take that step forward.
Alex, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Love that conversation.